Ned Stark, the Honorable Warden of the North, was a man defined by his sense of duty and unyielding moral code. His decision to refuse King Robert's demands, and later to confront the Lannisters, ultimately led to his tragic downfall. In Game of Thrones, Ned's execution at the hands of King Joffrey was one of the most shocking and pivotal moments in the story, a loss that set the stage for a brutal power struggle across Westeros. But what if Stannis Baratheon, Robert's stern and determined brother, had stepped in and saved Ned Stark from his fate? Stannis Baratheon was no stranger to loyalty. Throughout his life, Stannis had remained fiercely devoted to his family and his principles, though his rigid personality and sense of justice often isolated him from others. When Ned Stark made his fateful choice to confront the Lannisters, it was clear that he was willing to risk everything for the truth. Yet Stannis, known for his cold, calculated approach to ruling, had a unique opportunity to alter the course of history. By intervening to save Ned from execution, he could have dramatically shifted the power dynamics in Westeros. Had Stannis arrived in King's Landing in time to stop the execution, Ned Stark's life would have been spared. But this would have had massive consequences for the Lannisters, the Baratheons, and the entire realm. First, the immediate political fallout would have been profound. Joffrey Baratheon, the sadistic and impulsive king, would have been thwarted in his first real exercise of power. Without Ned's death, the Lannisters would have faced a significant setback in their quest for control of the Iron Throne. Instead of the Stark family becoming fragmented and weakened, Ned's survival would have solidified House Stark's position. Tywin Lannister, who was already a power player in the background, would have been forced to deal with the reality that the North, with its powerful army and claim to the throne through Robb Stark, was not to be underestimated. Ned, as Warden of the North and the true patriarch of House Stark, would have continued to be a thorn in the side of the Lannisters, forcing them to reckon with their ambitions in a much more complex political landscape. Ned's survival would also have affected his family. Robb Stark, the young king in the North, would have benefited greatly from having his father by his side. Instead of taking the crown prematurely, Robb might have been groomed to rule with his father's guidance, solidifying the Stark legacy and further challenging the Lannisters. Sansa Stark, free from Joffrey's cruel tyranny, might have been allowed to grow in a safer, more stable environment. Arya Stark, who was already developing a sharp mind and fierce will, would have been nurtured by her father's wisdom, and the Stark children's futures could have taken a much different path. The effects of Stannis' intervention wouldn't just be felt in the North. In King's Landing, the political situation would have become much more volatile. Tywin Lannister's ability to manipulate events from behind the scenes would have been significantly hindered by Ned's presence. Stannis, who was ever focused on the survival of his house and his right to the throne, would likely have sided with Ned, especially given his deep sense of duty to the Baratheon legacy. With Stannis on the scene, Tywin's attempts to maneuver his children into power would have faced much stronger opposition. Joffrey Baratheon, already a tyrant at heart, would have been severely weakened without the deaths of key players like Ned and his own mother's influence. Cersei Lannister, who had orchestrated much of the political chaos surrounding Joffrey's ascension, would have found herself increasingly isolated, as Stannis, a man of iron, conviction, would not have tolerated her manipulations. This would have set the stage for a far more intense and immediate power struggle within the Lannister family, with Stannis and his allies working against them. The Iron Throne, a battle of will. In this new timeline, Stannis Baratheon's role would have become more central to the struggle for the Iron Throne. His motivations were always clear. He believed his claim was rightful, and he was a man of action. If Stannis had intervened in time to save Ned Stark, his own path to the throne would have become much clearer. Stannis, with Ned at his side, might have turned his attention to consolidating support from both the north and other regions of Westeros, building a coalition strong enough to challenge the Lannisters and the eventual Targaryen resurgence. With Ned's survival, Stannis' path to the throne would have had more legitimacy. The key difference here is that instead of vying for the throne purely on his own claim, Stannis would have aligned himself with the honorable and noble Stark family. Together, they could have forged an alliance that united much of Westeros against the Lannisters, creating a force that Tywin Lannister could not easily overcome. The combined might of Stannis and the North could have presented a formidable challenge, one that Tywin would have struggled to navigate. However, Stannis' rigid sense of justice and lack of political flexibility could have also created fractures within his new alliance. While Ned Stark would have been a strong ally, Stannis was a man who could not be swayed by compromise, something that might have made it difficult to keep his newfound allies, such as House Stark, fully on board with his cause. Stannis' unwillingness to engage in the subtlety of politics could have alienated crucial allies at key moments. The Targaryen question, one of the most significant impacts of Stannis saving Ned, would have been the approach to Daenerys Targaryen, who in the original timeline was seen as a distant threat. With Ned alive, he would have recognized Daenerys as a major political player, and his survival might have led to a more strategic approach to dealing with her. While Stannis had no interest in bending to Targaryen rule, his alliance with Ned would likely have encouraged diplomacy rather than open conflict with Daenerys. In the original timeline, Stannis' immediate focus was on the Iron Throne and his own claim, but with Ned's presence, he might have sought an alliance with Daenerys, recognizing that the Targaryen threat would require a united front to deal with. Instead of a bloody confrontation, Stannis and Ned might have attempted to neutralize Daenerys' growing influence through political means, perhaps even offering her marriage or some form of alliance, preserving peace while eliminating the threat of her dragons. The War of Five Kings, a different outcome. Without Ned Stark's execution, the War of the Five Kings could have been entirely different. Robb Stark, supported by his father, and Stannis would have been a far more formidable figure in the North, and his cause would have resonated more deeply with the Northern lords. Instead of the internal strife that plagued the North after Ned's death, the Stark cause would have been unified under Ned's banner. The battle for the North would not have been about rebellion, but about reclaiming what was rightfully theirs, and with Stannis' backing, the Northern armies would have been significantly bolstered. In King's Landing, Joffrey's rule would have been threatened more quickly. With Stannis and Ned working together to curb the Lannisters' power, the balance of power would have shifted quickly. Tywin Lannister, despite his cunning, would not have been able to maintain control of the throne without the political and military superiority that came with Joffrey's rise and the death of Ned Stark. With Ned Stark's survival and Stannis Baratheon's intervention, the political landscape of Westeros would have been fundamentally altered, while Robert Baratheon's death left the realm teetering on the edge of chaos. The survival of Ned Stark would have brought a much-needed sense of stability and order. But the question now is, what would have happened when the War of the Five Kings erupted? The Stark and Baratheon alliance, with Ned Stark alive and working alongside Stannis Baratheon, the War of the Five Kings would have seen a unified North and Stormlands fighting side by side against the Lannisters, with a clear objective: to restore order to Westeros. This alliance between House Stark and House Baratheon would have been formidable, and the combined forces of Stannis' soldiers and the North's veteran warriors would have created a military force that could have crushed the Lannisters' hold on King's Landing. Robb Stark's campaign would have been entirely different. Instead of the independence movement he pursued on his own, Robb would have fought under the guidance and leadership of his father. Ned, as protector of the realm, would have led the strategy, combining his knowledge of the political landscape with Stannis' disciplined military tactics. The North would have rallied around this strong leadership, united under the Stark banner. In this new timeline, Robb Stark's path to kingship would have been less about rebellion and more about the preservation of House Stark's legacy. With Ned Stark as a protector and guiding figure, Robb would have gained a much stronger claim to the throne of the North, legitimizing his cause and keeping the northern houses united. The North would have been a solid, steadfast force for good, and with the Baratheons lending their support, the Stark banner would have flown proudly once again. Tywin Lannister's struggle for control. In King's Landing, the survival of Ned Stark and the subsequent alliance between Stannis and House Stark would have put Tywin Lannister in an incredibly difficult position. Tywin was a brilliant tactician, but he thrived in environments where manipulation, deceit, and subtlety could help him maintain control. With Stannis' ruthless nature and Ned's commitment to justice, Tywin would have found himself cornered, unable to wield his usual political power. His son, Joffrey, was already a weak king, and without Ned's death, his rule would have been far less secure. Tywin, who was already stretched thin trying to manage the Lannister hold over Westeros, would have had to decide between aligning with Stannis and potentially securing a more advantageous position or fighting against him, risking the disintegration of House Lannister's power. His usual political maneuvering would have been ineffective. In this scenario, Stannis, driven by his sense of duty and honor, would not have been easily swayed by Tywin's offers. The Lannisters would have faced more direct confrontations and military defeats, losing ground in their struggle for control of the Iron Throne. Cersei Lannister, also driven by her fierce desire for power, would have struggled to maintain her influence. Without the chaos created by Ned Stark's death, Cersei would have found herself facing a far stronger opposition. Stannis, with Ned's guidance, would have pushed for a more direct challenge to the Lannisters' hold over the throne. Cersei's manipulations would have been less effective in a court that was now united under the banner of justice and honor. The Targaryen question. Daenerys and the Targaryen threat. The survival of Ned Stark also meant that the Targaryen threat would have been handled with more caution and strategic foresight. While Robert Baratheon had dismissed the Targaryens as a potential threat, Ned, with his more nuanced understanding of the world, would have recognized the danger Daenerys posed earlier. In this timeline, Ned Stark's alliance with Stannis would have created a more unified Westeros, one that could better handle Daenerys' growing power across the narrow sea. Stannis, though focused on his own claim to the throne, would have likely considered the Targaryens a threat to his rule and to the stability of the realm. However, with Ned's moral compass guiding the way, the two men might have opted for a more diplomatic approach. Rather than allowing Daenerys' rise to become an uncontested force of nature, Ned and Stannis might have reached out to her, offering her an alliance or finding a way to neutralize the threat without resorting to open war. By aligning with the Targaryens in some capacity, they could have placed her in a position of power, but under their watchful eye, creating a more stable, peaceful transition of power rather than the brutal conflict that erupted later. The Lannister family's fall. With Stannis and Ned gaining the upper hand in the south, the Lannisters' grip on power would have weakened. Tywin, though still a formidable figure, would have found himself outmatched in the political game. His attempts to manipulate and control the throne would have been thwarted by the strong leadership of Ned and Stannis, who were both more disciplined and united in their cause. Tyrion Lannister, who had always been an outsider within his own family, would have found himself in a more difficult position. Without the backdrop of his father's harshness and resentment, Tyrion might have taken a different path. However, with the Lannisters' decline in power, Tyrion's ambitions might have led him into more dangerous waters. Tyrion would have had to navigate the shifting alliances carefully, especially with House Stark and Stannis Baratheon in charge of the South. The War of the Five Kings. A new outcome. The War of the Five Kings, which was originally a result of multiple factions vying for power in the wake of Robert Baratheon's death, would have played out quite differently with Ned Stark's survival and Stannis' intervention. Instead, Of being defined by chaos and constant infighting, the war might have seen the key factions unite under a more just cause. The war would likely have been a battle between the Lannisters, led by Tywin, and the forces of House Stark and House Baratheon. This united front would have made the war more organized, with both sides leveraging their military strength rather than resorting to the kind of chaotic, opportunistic fighting seen in the original timeline. In this timeline, the Lannisters would have struggled to maintain their hold on power. The North would have been unified, and Stannis' forces would have bolstered the Stark cause. Tywin, though a brilliant strategist, would have faced an overwhelming amount of opposition, weakening House Lannister's dominance. The future of Westeros, a kingdom united under Ned Stark. Had Stannis Baratheon saved Ned Stark, Westeros might have been united under a new banner. The realm, once divided and on the brink of war, could have been healed by Ned's leadership and Stannis' commitment to justice. Instead of seeing the kingdom torn apart by betrayal, bloodshed, and ambition, Ned's moral compass would have guided Westeros through one of its darkest periods. In this alternate timeline, the future of Westeros would have been one of stability, where alliances were forged out of mutual respect and loyalty rather than manipulation and betrayal. The rise of the Targaryens, the fall of House Lannister, and the wars that ravaged the kingdom would have been prevented, replaced by a united realm under the watchful eyes of Ned Stark and Stannis Baratheon.